Welcome to the world of science function. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. The hangar bay hummed with faint echoes of dripping condensation, the occasional hiss of distant pipes, and the subdued chatter of technicians murmuring over the day's deliveries. It was hardly a setting for legends to be born, but this was precisely where it began. Among a series of battered, ancient starships that looked more like a scrapyard waiting to be swept up than a fleet, stood Commander Darian Salas, a man whose life had become a catalogue of bad assignments. Darian crossed his arms as he surveyed the heap of junk before him, a derelict starship whose only redeeming quality seemed to be that it hadn't yet fallen apart. A cynical grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "This is what they expect us to fight with," he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief and frustration. Next to him, Captain V. Korik, his second-in-command, gave a low whistle. Her dark eyes traced the jagged weld scars on the hull, the mismatched plating, and the faint plume of smoke curling from an exposed vent. "It's almost impressive. I didn't think starships could get this bad without completely disintegrating." A sharp voice rang out from behind them, drawing their attention. "Ah, don't be so quick to judge." A wiry figure in an oil-stained jumpsuit emerged from under the starship, holding a plasma torch like a proud artisan showing off their work. It was Chief Engineer Erin Mazurek, a woman whose passion for tinkering was only rivaled by her knack for turning garbage into miracles. "She's got potential. Potential to collapse the moment we leave the hangar," Darian quipped, earning a chuckle from V. Erin smirked, unfazed by their skepticism. "You'd be surprised what a little ingenuity and elbow grease can do. Give me a week with her, and she'll fly like a dream." "Erin, this thing doesn't even have a functional hyperdrive," V said, gesturing toward the exposed innards of the ship. "It's a glorified space coffin." "Well, Commander," Erin said, leaning against the starship with an exaggerated air of confidence, "you can either trust me or keep waiting for Central Command to send us reinforcements. And we both know how that's going." Darian sighed. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos, and his squadron had been relegated to the farthest edge of the conflict, tasked with defending an unremarkable outpost. They had been promised reinforcements, resources, and state-of-the-art equipment, but what they'd received instead was this, a scrap heap masquerading as a starship. As the crew continued their debate, a group of junior officers approached, each carrying a datapad loaded with mission reports. Among them was Ensign Cale Roran, the youngest and most enthusiastic member of the team. "Commander," Cale called out, nearly tripping over his own feet in his rush to join them. "You won't believe this, there's chatter about an enemy fleet mobilizing near our sector." "Great," Darian muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. Because this day wasn't already shaping up to be a disaster. Cale hesitated, sensing the tension. "Ah, but we'll be ready, right? I mean, once we fix up the ship." "Fixing the ship would require a miracle," V said, though her tone had softened slightly. She had a soft spot for Cale's unshakable optimism, even if it often bordered on naive. Erin clapped a hand on Cale's shoulder. "Don't worry, kid. We'll make it work. We always do." Darian turned back to the starship, his gaze lingering on the faded insignia barely visible beneath layers of grime. It had once been a proud vessel, perhaps even a war hero in its prime. But now it was a relic of a bygone era, abandoned and forgotten, much like the squadron itself. As he studied the ship, an idea began to take root in his mind. It was crazy, borderline suicidal, but it was the only option they had. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady and resolute. "We'll do it. We'll fix her up." V raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "We don't have a choice," Darian said. "If the enemy's moving on our position, we need to be ready. Erin, you've got 1 week. Get this ship operational." Erin's grin widened. "You won't regret this, Commander." Cale practically beamed with excitement. "I'll help. I can." "You'll do exactly what Erin tells you to," V interrupted, though there was a hint of a smile on her lips. The crew set to work, each member tackling a different aspect of the ship's restoration. Erin led the charge, her energy infectious as she barked orders and delegated tasks. Kale was eager to learn, absorbing every piece of advice Erin threw his way. Even V, who usually preferred command and strategy to manual labor, found herself elbow-deep in grease, repairing circuits and stabilizers. As the days passed, the ship began to transform. The hull was patched, the engines overhauled, and the hyperdrive cobbled together from salvaged parts. The crew worked tirelessly, their camaraderie growing stronger with each shared joke and late-night coffee break. By the end of the week, the ship was no longer a junkyard relic, it was a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for the first time in months, the crew felt a glimmer of hope. On the 7th day, Darian stood before the ship, its exterior gleaming under the hangar's fluorescent lights. He turned to Erin, who looked both exhausted and triumphant. "You did it." "We did it," Erin corrected, gesturing to the crew gathered around them. Darian nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "All right, let's see what she's got." The crew climbed aboard, their excitement tempered by nervous anticipation. The ship's interior was still rough around the edges, with exposed wiring and mismatched panels, but it was functional. As the engines roared to life, the vibrations reverberating through the hull, a cheer erupted from the crew. "Hold on to your seats," Erin called from the engineering console. "This is going to be a bumpy ride." The ship rose from the hangar floor, its thrusters blazing as it ascended into the star-filled expanse above. For a moment, all was still, the crew holding their breath as they prepared for the ultimate test. "Hyperdrive engaged," Erin announced, her fingers flying over the controls. The ship lurched forward, the stars stretching into streaks of light as they entered hyperspace. Against all odds, the scrap heap had become a starship once more. And as the crew celebrated their success, Darian couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They had been handed a pile of junk, but they had forged it into something extraordinary. What they didn't know was that their journey was just beginning, and the true test of their resolve was yet to come. The hum of the hyperdrive was almost hypnotic as the newly revived starship sped through hyperspace, its patchwork hull holding together against all odds. The crew, buoyed by their recent success, was beginning to settle into their roles aboard the vessel. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered like a dormant volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. Darian sat in the captain's chair, his eyes fixed on the holographic display projected above the console. The screen showed a dense cluster of red blips steadily approaching their position, an enemy fleet. The chatter about a possible attack was no longer rumor, it was fact. And they were severely outgunned. "We've got 48 hours until they're in range," V reported, her voice steady despite the grim news. "And that's being optimistic." Darian rubbed his temples, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. "What's the status of our weapons systems?" Erin, perched at the engineering console with her ever-present toolkit, looked up with a mixture of pride and trepidation. "We've got a functional railgun and 2 plasma turrets. It's not much, but it'll pack a punch if we hit the right spots." "If," V repeated, arching an eyebrow. "We'll be lucky if those things don't overheat after the first shot." "We'll make it work," Darian said firmly. "We always do." Just as he finished speaking, a loud clang echoed through the ship, followed by a flicker of the lights. Kale, who had been nervously pacing near the tactical console, nearly jumped out of his skin. "What was that?" Erin sighed, already on her feet and grabbing her toolkit. "Relax, kid. It's probably just a loose panel. I'll check it out." As she disappeared down the corridor, Darian turned his attention back to the display. The enemy fleet's trajectory was unrelenting, like a predator closing in on its prey. He knew they couldn't outrun them, not in this patched-up vessel. Their only chance was to outsmart them. "But how?" "Commander," Kale said hesitantly, his voice breaking the silence. What if we tried something unconventional?" Darian glanced at the young ensign, who was nervously wringing his hands. "Go on." "Well," Kale continued, his cheeks flushing slightly under the weight of their attention, "we've got the element of surprise, right? They think we're just a junk heap. What if we use that to our advantage? Lay a trap or something? V tilted her head, considering the idea. It's risky. But it's not the worst idea I've heard today. It's not bad at all, Darian said, a spark of inspiration igniting in his mind. We could rig the ship to look even more derelict than it already does. Make it seem like we're dead in the water. Then, when they come in close to finish us off, we hit them where it hurts, V finished, a faint smirk forming on her lips. Kale beamed, his nervous energy transforming into excitement. Exactly. All right, Darian said, standing up and addressing the crew. Here's the plan. We're going to stage a fake distress signal, make it look like we've suffered a catastrophic failure. Aaron, I need you to rig the ship to power down on command, but keep the weapons systems on standby. Aaron reappeared in the doorway, her toolkit slung over one shoulder. You're asking me to make this ship look worse than it already does? Shouldn't be too hard. And V, Darian continued, you'll oversee the execution of the ambush. Coordinate the timing so we hit them with everything we've got the moment they drop their guard. What about me? Kale asked eagerly. You'll handle the distress signal, Darian said. Make it convincing. We want them to believe we're stranded and helpless. Kale nodded, his chest puffing up with a sense of purpose. You can count on me, sir. The crew got to work, each member tackling their assigned task with determination. Aaron rewired the ship's systems, creating a failsafe that would allow them to shut down everything but the essentials at the push of a button. V analyzed the enemy fleet's formation, devising a strategy to maximize their limited firepower. Kale recorded the distress signal, his voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. As the hours ticked by, the weight of their mission began to sink in. They were gambling everything on this one plan, and failure wasn't an option. The enemy wouldn't hesitate to obliterate them if they saw through the ruse. Finally, the moment arrived. The ship dropped out of hyperspace, its engines sputtering and lights flickering as Aaron activated the programmed failure sequence. To an outside observer, it looked as though the vessel had suffered catastrophic damage, leaving it adrift in the void. Kale's distress signal crackled through the comms, his voice a perfect mix of desperation and fear. This is the Starship Solace. We've suffered a critical systems failure. Requesting immediate assistance. Please, anyone out there, help us. Darian watched the holographic display as the enemy fleet began to adjust their trajectory, drawn to the bait like moths to a flame. He felt a pang of guilt at the thought of luring them into a trap, but he quickly pushed it aside. This was war, and survival required tough choices. As the enemy ships closed in, V's voice rang out over the comms. Everyone, to your stations. This is it. The crew braced themselves, the tension in the air palpable. Aaron's fingers hovered over the controls, ready to reactivate the ship at a moment's notice. Kale's hands shook slightly as he monitored the incoming fleet, his earlier confidence giving way to nerves. Hold, Darian said, his voice calm and steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Hold. The enemy ships were almost within range now, their weapons systems powering up as they prepared to deliver the final blow. Now! Darian barked. Aaron slammed her hand on the console, and the ship roared to life. The lights blazed, the engines roared, and the weapons systems locked onto their targets. The enemy fleet hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden resurgence of their seemingly helpless prey. Fire! V commanded. The railgun unleashed a deafening blast, tearing through the nearest enemy ship with precision. The plasma turrets followed suit, spewing bolts of energy that ripped through the fleet's formation. Chaos erupted as the enemy scrambled to regroup, their initial advantage shattered by the Solace's unexpected counterattack. Darian gripped the armrests of his chair, his eyes fixed on the battle unfolding before him. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the enemy didn't: ingenuity, courage, and a willingness to fight against impossible odds. As the crew worked in unison, their makeshift starship proving to be more formidable than anyone could have imagined, Darian allowed himself a small smile. They were far from safe, but for the first time, they had a fighting chance. And in the cold, unforgiving depths of space, sometimes that was enough. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. Explosions illuminated the void, scattering debris across the inky expanse as the Solace danced through the storm. The enemy fleet had recovered from their initial shock, and their response was relentless. Pulses of crimson plasma streaked through the darkness, narrowly missing the ship as Aaron's improvised thrusters pushed the patched-up vessel to its limits. "Shields are down to 30%. Kale shouted, his hands flying across the tactical console. The young ensign's earlier enthusiasm had been replaced by a look of grim determination. "Keep them steady," Darien barked, gripping the edge of his seat as the ship jolted under the impact of a glancing blow. "Aaron, I need more speed." Aaron's voice crackled through the comms, strained but confident. "You want miracles? I'm fresh out. But I'll give you every ounce this bucket of bolts has left." The Solace surged forward, its engines leaving a trail of blue fire as it outmaneuvered the pursuing ships. V sat beside Darien, her eyes narrowed as she analyzed the enemy's formation. "They're adapting faster than I expected. If we don't change the game soon, we're toast." Darien clenched his jaw. He knew she was right. The enemy ships were closing in, their superior firepower threatening to overwhelm the Solace at any moment. They needed an edge, something to tip the scales in their favor. But what? As if on cue, Kale's console beeped urgently. "Commander, I'm picking up something, an energy signature. It's faint, but it's close." "Define close," Darien said, his tone sharp. "About 20,000 kilometers off our port side," Kale replied. It's big. Big enough to distract them?" V asked, her mind already racing. Kale hesitated, then nodded. "Definitely." Darien's mind worked quickly, formulating a plan. "V, plot a course toward that signature. Aaron, I need you to reroute power to the thrusters. We're going to make a run for it." Aaron's voice came back over the comms, laced with skepticism. "You sure about this, Commander? Whatever's out there might be worse than what we're dealing with. Or it might be our only chance," Darien said firmly. "We don't have time to debate. Do it." The crew moved as one, their trust in Darien driving them to push through the fear and uncertainty. The Solace banked hard to port, its engines roaring as it accelerated toward the mysterious energy signature. The enemy ships followed, their weapons blazing in an attempt to bring down the fleeing vessel. As they drew closer to the source of the signature, the faint outline of a massive structure began to take shape in the distance. It was a derelict station, its surface pockmarked with signs of age and battle. But despite its dilapidated state, the energy readings were unmistakable. "What is that?" Kale murmured, his eyes wide as the station loomed larger on the display. "Something old," V said, her voice tinged with awe. "And powerful." Aaron's voice crackled through the comms again, excitement replacing her earlier skepticism. "Commander, this station isn't just derelict, it's armed. I'm picking up traces of advanced weaponry. If we can tap into its systems." Darien didn't need to hear the rest. "Then let's make it happen. Kale, find us a way in. Aaron, prep the ship for docking." The Solace weaved through the station's debris field, narrowly avoiding chunks of twisted metal as it approached a docking port. The enemy fleet hesitated, wary of the unknown structure, but their hesitation was brief. They pressed forward, determined to eliminate their target. As the Solace docked with the station, the crew sprang into action. Aaron led the charge, her toolkit in hand as she pried open a control panel near the airlock. Sparks flew as she worked, her hands a blur of motion. "This tech is ancient, but it's good. Really good. Give me a few minutes." "We don't have a few minutes," V said, glancing at the display showing the enemy ships closing in. Aaron shot her a look but didn't stop working. "Then start praying." Kale hovered nearby, his nerves threatening to get the better of him. "What if it doesn't work?" "It will," Darien said, his voice steady. "Aaron's never let us down before." The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the enemy ships drew closer. Finally, Aaron let out a triumphant laugh. "Got it. The station's defenses are online." The control room lit up as ancient systems roared to life, casting a greenish glow over the crew. Holographic displays flickered into existence, showing targeting data for the station's weapons. Massive railguns and missile batteries turned toward the approaching fleet, their movements slow but deliberate. "Fire everything we've got," Darien ordered. The station unleashed a barrage of firepower that made the Solace's weapons look like toys in comparison. Railgun slugs tore through the enemy ships, their shields useless against the sheer force of the impact. Missiles streaked through the void, detonating with devastating precision. The fleet, once so confident in their superiority, was thrown into disarray. Cheers erupted among the crew as the tide of battle turned in their favor. But Darien knew the fight wasn't over yet. Focus fire on their flagship. If we take it out, the rest will scatter." The Solace joined the station's assault, its railgun and plasma turrets targeting the enemy flagship. The ship was heavily armored, but the combined firepower of the Solace and the station began to take its toll. Explosions rippled across its surface as it struggled to maintain cohesion. "Come on," Darien muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. "Just a little more." The flagship's engines sputtered and died, a massive explosion tearing through its core. The remaining enemy ships, now leaderless and outmatched, retreated into hyperspace, leaving the Solace and the station victorious. As the battlefield fell silent, the crew allowed themselves a moment of relief. But Darien's mind was already racing. The station had saved them, but its power was a double-edged sword. Whoever built it had left behind technology far beyond anything they had seen before, and it was now in their hands. "What do we do now?" Cale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Darien looked out at the wreckage of the battle, his expression unreadable. "We survive," he said finally. "And we figure out what we've just stumbled into." The station hung in the vast void of space, a relic of a forgotten war, its immense silhouette illuminated by the smoldering remnants of the enemy fleet. Inside, the crew of the Solace stood in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the console displays. The ancient defenses had obliterated their pursuers with ruthless precision, leaving a quiet unease in the air. Victory tasted bittersweet. The station had saved them, but its very existence posed questions they weren't ready to answer. Erin leaned against the control panel, wiping sweat and grease from her forehead. "Well, that was one hell of a show," she said, forcing a grin. "But now we've got a problem." V folded her arms, her gaze flicking between Erin and Darien. Understatement of the century. Whoever built this place wasn't just defending themselves, they were preparing for something big. And now it's ours. "Not sure ours is the right word," Darien said, his tone grave. He gestured to the holographic schematics floating in midair. "This station is running on autopilot. Its weapon systems are active, but it's not responding to our commands. It's like, it's waiting." "For what?" Cale asked, his voice filled with equal parts curiosity and dread. Erin tapped on the console, her brow furrowed as she sifted through the data. "A signal, maybe. Or a specific command sequence. Whatever it is, it's locked behind layers of encryption I've never seen before." V stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied the display. "So we're sitting on a weapon that can destroy entire fleets, and we can't control it. That's just great." Darien rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of their situation pressing down on him. "We don't have a choice. If we abandon it, someone else will find it, maybe even the enemy. And if they figure out how to use it." The room fell silent, the implications sinking in. The station wasn't just a weapon, it was a game-changer, something that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. But in the wrong hands, it could bring about untold destruction. Cale broke the silence, his voice hesitant. "What if we try to send a message? Let Central Command know what we found. They'd take it from us in a heartbeat," V said, her tone sharp. "And who's to say they wouldn't misuse it? This kind of power corrupts, Cale." Erin glanced at Darien, her expression unreadable. "So what do we do, Commander? Do we try to unlock it? Or do we leave it buried?" Darien stared at the holographic schematics, the glow reflecting in his eyes. Every instinct told him to destroy the station, to eliminate the threat before it could fall into the wrong hands. But the crew had risked everything to survive, and abandoning the station now felt like throwing away their only chance at securing a future. "We stay," he said finally, his voice firm. "If this station has secrets, we'll uncover them. But we do it on our terms. No one else gets their hands on this until we know exactly what we're dealing with." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. Darien's decision had always been their compass, and now was no different. They would trust him, even if it meant walking into the unknown. Over the next few days, the crew worked tirelessly to stabilize the station and piece together its history. Erin buried herself in the control systems, decoding ancient scripts and algorithms that seemed to defy logic. V mapped out the station's structure, uncovering hidden chambers filled with advanced technology and remnants of its creators. Kale assisted wherever he could, his youthful enthusiasm tempered by the gravity of their discovery. As they delved deeper, the station began to reveal its secrets. They learned it had been built during a galactic war centuries ago, a last-ditch effort to create a weapon capable of turning the tide. But its creators had vanished before they could wield it, leaving the station adrift and forgotten. One discovery, however, sent a chill through the crew. In the heart of the station, buried beneath layers of reinforced plating, they found a command center unlike anything they'd seen before. The walls were covered in glowing glyphs, pulsating with a rhythm that felt almost alive. At the center of the room stood a massive console, its surface etched with symbols that defied translation. "This is it," Erin said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the core." Darien approached the console cautiously, his hand hovering over its surface. "Can you access it?" Erin shook her head. "Not yet. Whatever's locking it down is advanced. It's like it's testing us." "Testing us?" Kale asked, his brow furrowing. "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't just a weapon," V said, her voice low. "It's a legacy. Its creators didn't want just anyone to use it. They wanted someone worthy." Darien stared at the console, his mind racing. The station wasn't just a relic, it was a challenge. A puzzle left behind by a civilization that had entrusted its greatest creation to the future. And now, that trust had fallen to them. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "No matter how long it takes." The crew nodded, their resolve hardening. They had started as survivors, scraping by on the edge of the galaxy. But now, they were something more. They were the custodians of a forgotten legacy, tasked with uncovering its secrets and ensuring it didn't fall into the wrong hands. As they left the command center, the glyphs on the console pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging their presence. The station had been waiting for centuries, and now, it seemed, it had found its guardians. In the days that followed, the crew continued their work, balancing the station's maintenance with their mission to unlock its core. The galaxy remained a dangerous place, and the enemy wasn't likely to forget their defeat. But for the first time in a long while, Darien felt hope. The solace had been forged from scrap, a testament to resilience and ingenuity. And now, with the station at their side, they had the tools to forge a future worth fighting for. The stars stretched endlessly before them, filled with uncertainty and possibility. And as the crew prepared for whatever lay ahead, one thing was clear: they weren't just survivors anymore. They were builders, dreamers, and defenders of a legacy that had been waiting for them all along.